Very good. Good morning, everyone. Got 5 people here as of this point, and may have a couple more. We have some fairly safe topics initially today, and Dane submitted a email to me yesterday regarding and video regarding the chokehold incident in New York.
Yeah.
That's on the I'm going to put that for next time unless we get through what we want to do today, because there are a lot of ifs there, and it'd be nice to see things settled out a little bit before we get to it, so we can attack it a little more intelligently. The list you have in front of you has actually grown, but I figured no sense adding additional topics right now. Well, they're on the list, but they're not on the list you have. Anyhow, the first topic we're dealing with, and this one is another one of Dane's, is on ukemi. Theoretically, its role and origin in relation to to karate blocks, and transition from jitsu to do for all arts. You want to kind of let us know why you came up with this topic? So give us some direction.
Yep. So I guess as briefly as I can, I think to me, what I realized is a lot of where we are today with martial arts and is owed to ukemi. And I think that was the major, so for jujitsu, I think that the pre-1800s jujitsu, they didn't really focus on ukemi. They focused on throwing you and really harming the person they're throwing. And I think they did a lot of half throwing because, they didn't throw them all the way because the intention was you would land on your face and break your neck. So they didn't really throw them. And then over time, Kano, I feel like, was really responsible for really focusing on ukemi and making it so the jujitsu techniques, there's a way to do them all the way because there's a way for somebody to receive them. So now you're altering how you do the jujitsu technique because now you want the person getting it done to them to get out of it. Like, you want them now to be able to roll out of it and stand back up. But 100 years before that, you weren't able to do that. They weren't practicing rolling and getting out of things, and you weren't throwing them in a way that they could get out of it. So you just didn't throw them, or you did these other things. And I think the same thing, so, that brought us to what we have now of like that judo paradigm of you practice ukemi a lot so that you can, have these techniques done. Then you learn to do them. And it's always in a way that you have a partner, not an opponent, and I think that's the key to why judo is a sport and jujitsu is not, is because there's a way for the person to receive what you're doing and accept it, and it doesn't kill them, right? So then you can just keep moving on and on and on. That's a sport. Like, you can't have a sport if the first throw ends the match, and that ends the person's career as well, right? So the first throw has to be something you bounce back up from and move on. You get a point for it instead of, being done with it all. And I think that concept filtered into karate and gave us a lot of the confusion there. Like we've talked about before, it's kind of my hypothesis that, and not just mine, and I'm not unique here, but that a lot of the actual meaning of karate movements are inextricably linked to jujitsu style techniques. And it wasn't until you came up with the idea of a block for that technique that it became that back and forth. So in karate, instead of taking falls and rolls, you do blocks, right? So that's still how you're receiving your partner's energy, right? So, in karate, if the person's throwing a punch at you, now you block it, and then you throw a punch at them and they block that. So it becomes a mental picture of a sport. It becomes it's like you're playing ping pong. Whether you're doing judo or karate, you're playing ping pong. Like, I'm doing something, you're going to accept it without any problem, and then you're going to do something and I'm going to accept it without any problem, and we're going to keep doing that until we're tired of it, or you think somebody did it enough times. And I think the original thing, you really didn't want the other person to have something to do. You know, you wanted to put them in a hold and just take them down completely. That's that. You know, or you want to do this karate technique to them and they have no idea what's happening and you do whatever to them. So anyway, long story short, I think it's ukemi itself is the key to going from a jitsu to a do, whether it's karate and you're talking about blocking as ukemi, or you're in judo and you're taking these rolls and falls to get out of things. That influenced the art and changed the goal, and it changed how you do it. And that's true of all of the arts in the modern time. They all have their version of how to be a good partner, right?
Yeah.
And I guess part of that goes to with the other questions there. So given that kind of a thing, that it's really there not so much for the martial part of it, but more for the drilling and sport aspect, how much ukemi is the focus, I think, is kind of where I was coming from with that. Like, how much should you emphasize doing ukemi and expecting ukemi and kind of training for the person to take ukemi versus training so they can't? And then training in ukemi itself, how good at taking falls do you want to be? Like, when I studied Aikido, you know, I think we had like a 3-hour, I think it was 3 hours on Saturdays, and probably 45 minutes to an hour was just rolling, you know, literally just doing forward rolls, and like back falls and things like that. And then it would be like, pull out a folding chair and now jump over the folding chair and do a roll. And then, you know, throw your belt on the ground and jump over the chair, grab your belt and do a roll. And have 2 students line up and bend down and then jump over both of them and do a roll. And, you know, it becomes you're studying and getting good at like gymnastics in a way, not actually Aikido, right? And, you know, that looks good in demonstrations and whatever. So it becomes, what is your point of ukemi? What are you doing with it? What's its place? And, you know, that kind of thing.
Right.
I know it's a long-winded intro, but that's kind of where I'm coming from.
Okay, I think just my 2 cents. Having fallen down a flight of stairs 2 weeks ago, and surprisingly not broken anything. And I basically did a ukemi and rode that all the way down the stairs. It was a rough ride. Some scrapes, some blood, some lots of bruising, soreness, but just doing that automatically makes all that practice worth it to me. I think the purpose of ukemi, as you've said, is they're called break falls. It breaks your fall. It may not necessarily prevent you from getting injured. As I tell my students, I think you'd much rather have a broken arm or a broken wrist versus a concussion, a broken pelvis, broken, you know, everything is relative. And we're used to, let's see, we used to, decades ago, we used to practice going over 2 people. I have, and we don't do that anymore. The maiai ukemi are forward rolls. I've kind of changed my approach. I said, we don't have to teach you how to fall. Gravity takes care of that. We're trying to teach you how to land safely. And so, and so that becomes the emphasis. And so we spend maybe 5 maybe 10 minutes at the beginning of class doing ukemi and break falls from a squat from, different positions. And the new students get thrown slowly so they can, they can apply the concept. And they probably learn more from taking falls than they do from doing ukemi. Because they see it in practice and then they see the value of it. I know there have been some. I had one black belt for a while who, in his infinite wisdom, decided to have his students do ukemi over park benches. And I said, that's a rigid object. You realize if one of your students hits that, you're going to be out of a teaching position. There was also many decades ago a judo instructor at a local YMCA who had his students do maiai off a step ladder until one of them landed on the base of his neck and became a quadriplegic. There are really some, how do you say, there are really some stupid things that are done in order to make a nice show. And as a sensei, your number one rule is protect your students. So anyway, I think the ukemi have that. I think what Dane said has a lot of merit in terms of how ukemi, whether it be the block or the fall, learning how to fall properly, has modified defensive arts into sport, because you have to have safety. You have to have safety in a sport. One of the things we do with our students is, I've had several students in street situations. All they've had to do is throw their student, what the attack or whatever it was. They never had to go to the ground. The student was injured on ground impact, or the technique injured them. They obviously didn't know how to fall. I've had, anyway, no, I haven't. But we teach them, when you throw a person, you pull up on their sleeves so they land on their side. On the street, I say, if you want to have them land flat on their back, hunky-dory. It all depends what you want to do with them after you have thrown them. But they, as a Tory, they need to realize they have some control over how much damage they can do to a attacker, because that's really important. And that would play into the subway issue the other day, which is, your own self-control and defending yourself. Because one of the issues we're going to get into down the road is excessive force again, and all that other neat stuff. Good morning, Darren. Good morning, Joni.
Good morning.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Morning.
Anybody else want to chime in on this?
Ukemi is also a defensive learning skill, because if you get thrown yourself on the street, then you know how to come down. So it's also a defensive skill, and continuing with a new technique, doing a ukemi, a tomo enake or something like that.
Right. And that's why that maiai ukemi is important. Is theoretically you're being pushed from the back. You go down, you come back up, but when you come back up, you are facing your opponent rather than having your back to him so that you can be pushed down again. So you're right. It is a quote unquote, the maiai ukemi is a quote unquote defensive move.
Sensei, one of my favorite definitions of self-defense is protecting self, protecting me from myself, as in that form of self-defense. And the ignorant things that I had to admit to throughout my life, one of them was standing on a ladder, the step that says this is not a step. That's the one I was on when I was putting an end cap on a gutter. And I took my feet were about 6 feet off the ground, and I took a spill because the ladder shot out from underneath me, and I landed on a concrete slab in front of my house, and slapped out and tapped my head slightly, even though I had tucked it, and lay there for a moment and realized nothing was broken and stood up. And then I hope none of my neighbors saw it, because I was afraid one of them was going to say, "Dave, that was really cool. Would you do it again so I can get it on video?" But protection from self, learning how to fall is definitely high on the list.
I would say the only time I've ever used ukemi in real life is on the ice.
Yeah.
I remember I used to wear like slippery boots back in college, and I can remember walking on these icy sidewalks all around town, and me and my friends would just be falling constantly. But I would fall with ukemi. Yep, it's life-changing knowing how to fall in normal life.
You got to put crampons on the bottom of those boots.
Yeah, hindsight. Other people buy crampons, I learn ukemi, you know.
It's not good for maths though. Anyway.
All the times that I've had students come back to me and say, "Oh, I learned this in your class," with one exception, it was they protected themselves from a fall, and it was usually had nothing to do with an attack. It was just like you were saying, it was on the ice or they slipped on something. And I did the same thing, first time for me, but it was just last year. I stupidly tripped on one of those bumpers in a parking lot. Bad glasses, I couldn't see it. And that could have been a nasty fall. I ended up doing a forward roll, and I think there were a few people that were like you that said, "Could you do that again? Because we'd like to get that on film." But that's the most common. No, with every student that's come back and said, "I used something I learned in your class," with one exception, it was a fall, how to fall and not get hurt. So like George, like you were saying, we all know how to fall. That's easy. It's how to land. I never put it that way, but that's what they were learning, and they did. That's what they appreciated from and got from it, and that's more common than being attacked.
It's like if I don't know if any of you have ever parachuted. I haven't, but there's no problem parachuting. The parachute works. The real problem is the landing, because if you don't land right, you can break your leg. You can cause some serious injury to yourself. There is a way to land wearing a parachute relatively safely. And, so the height is irrelevant. It's those last few inches that's going to get you.
If you teach a technique and somebody can any ukemis, haven't learned them, then a skilled teacher can actually show it with a slow technique, the right way to fall down. If you do it slow, you learn him or her to follow the technique and fall down. So it is possible to learn jujitsu to a person without learning the ukemis first, but then you have to be a skilled teacher.
Yeah. And
one thing I think that is a negative about ukemi is, I think you mentioned it, Sensei, that you're kind of teaching them the response to your technique, and you become reliant on your opponent knowing that response. Like, I think we've talked about this with Aikido. If you do Aikido techniques to an Aikido person, they fall down really hard and scream in pain and roll around. If you do it to your neighbor, they just walk in a circle around you and they're like, "What are you doing?" And because they don't know the ukemi. They don't know they're supposed to not take that step and just like let their arm get wrapped up upside down, right? But if you just like walk forward while that's happening, you're like, "What are you doing to me?" But if you stand there, next thing you know, you're on your knees, crippled, So I think that's one aspect of ukemi that is dangerous, is expecting that your opponent is like going to receive it and not walk out of it, not turn that.
I think one of the, and you brought up a very interesting point here, which is really, really obvious, more obvious in Aikido, and probably then shows up in Jujitsu as well, is that it's very important for the person who's doing the technique to know how the technique feels, both as the person executing the technique and as the receiver. Because if you know what's happening, if you can feel what's happening to the other person's body, and you know what they're feeling and how their body is moving, then that's going to give you more control of them. And you can pick up when your technique is and is not working, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think the value of cooperating to some extent through the ukemi, which really shows up in Aikido, is that it helps both sides learn how the technique actually works and what the proper movement is to get that technique to work properly. Now, I also, I've known some Aiki Jiu-Jitsu sensei who, you don't move fast enough, that Aikido technique is going to break your wrist, because for some reason Jiu-Jitsu people are a little rougher on each other. Or we assume that this person is familiar with the technique, and they're gonna take the fall because the fall is less pain than the injury. Trying to teach a corkscrew to new students, you take it and you go under their arm, and they're supposed to do a nice forward roll fall. If they don't know how to do a front somersault, their point of impact is their head. And that doesn't benefit either one of you. Although that's probably what's going to happen on the street. So the teaching ukemi has a number of different values, as long as we don't make it, how do you say, an entity to itself. Oh, let's see if you can, let's see if you can do my ukemi over a car. Let's see if you can jump up 8 feet and then do a side fall. All the extreme measures. Because I don't think on the street you don't really have any high falls. If someone's going to throw you, if they have half a brain, they're going to plant you into the ground. So it's not going to be a high fall. So it can be a fall with a lot of force behind it, or landing, excuse me. But it's not going to, you're not going to jump up to an altitude where you need oxygen. Anyway, anyone else want to throw something in here before we?
You hit on two things, but one of the side effects of teaching ukemi, we need to do that in order for us to be able to practice with each other.
Right.
I can't do the technique. I can do it. I can do it once to somebody who doesn't know how to respond to it, and then I'll never see them again, and I'll probably get sued. So we teach them how to fall and how to land, as Sensei says, properly, in order to be able to practice it. But the side effect of that is students don't realize we go through this whole list of steps, and the reality is if they had to actually do that on the street, they're not going to get past step one because the person's going to be on the ground bleeding, or they've got a broken wrist or something. The things that we do in class extend beyond what the reality on the street's going to be.
Right. I agree with you. Every student of mine that has been in a street situation, their first comment to me was, "Sensei, the technique worked."
Yeah.
And I say, "Good. How are you?" Yeah. So, that's, and you're right. You have to have this cooperation to learn the technique safely. We're not back in ancient Japan where the samurai could pick one of his, farm workers and say, "Okay, you're my uke for the next 10 minutes. It's been nice knowing you." And, he gets his uke becomes, the next body 6 feet under, whatever you want to call it.
I'm pretty sure I read that in those old jujitsu schools, those like 1600s schools way back, that's how it worked. Like if you came in as a beginner student, all you did is get thrown by the people
Right.
above you, but not taught how to get thrown. You just got thrown. They just practiced on you, and it was like a hazing thing. And like you either got the ability to get back up or you didn't. And like that was your introduction to it. Yeah.
I think
Just disregarded for you.
I think one of the things that was touched on, understanding the technique from both the receiver and the giver's position, you have to also consider verbal command, especially nowadays when you're dealing with someone out on the street. If you're positive about what you're doing and you're vocal about what you're doing, you say, "Get out on the ground." They understand where to go and how to move, and it makes it easier to control them. If you don't give them a command, then like you said, maybe someone gets hurt a little harder or they resist a little more, but that psychological command says, "Yeah, I'm going to do what they say and maybe things will be better for me." Or at least that's what I've come to know.
Yeah, Tony, you're right on spot, and this is what I've get my mouth organized here. I've learned over the years, you have to give clear verbal either tell the person, or you're initially, and Larry Alvarez has a really good segment on this. We may get to another one. Initially, you're trying to reduce the level of violence or be more condescending to get out of a physical confrontation. But once you're in a confrontation, you do have to sound authoritative. Your commands do have to be clear. They have to be understandable. And with the intent is so that maybe this person will have a sufficient brain cell capacity that they will follow your directions and you won't have to hurt them possibly as much. Okay. But thank you for bringing that up, Tony, because verbal commands are so important, particularly today when, everybody's got, each person has 3 smartphones out. Police have, body cams. You've got cameras on buildings. You're into a CYA policy.
Right.
That's in case you don't know, Joni, that means cover your assets. And I'm putting it politely because that's how I explain the term in the classroom. You have to give verbal commands. Because it also puts you in a better position if anything goes south. Anyway,
And I think too that ties into the ki. Like I think those verbal commands are ki's. Like that's
Right.
you putting your energy out, towards your opponent. You're
right.
telling them what to do and, projecting that.
And when I've worked with law enforcement, I try not to be facetious because every profession has their own warped sense of humor. But I try to work when I work with police officers. I try to say, as much as you can, get the word "please" in there. I mean, it is somewhat tongue in cheek. You know, please put your hands behind your back. But to anyone listening, it sounds like you're trying to be, you can be authoritative, but it sounds like you're trying to be polite at the same time. And it's amazing what sometimes what the word please will do. I've seen it where they tend to cooperate more, and I've seen it when you say please, they tell you what you can do with please. It goes both ways.
It definitely makes non-compliance clear.
Yes.
You said please, you asked nicely, you did everything you could.
Yeah.
I think that dovetails into the situation with the chokehold the other day.
Yeah. Anyway, okay, do we want to do anything else with ukemi, or any words of wisdom, Darren?
Sensei, I had a couple of comments, but I believe everybody covered some good points. So I appreciate the dialogue between. It just gets a little loud where I am, so I was just trying to keep it on mute.
Okay. Okay. How do you, Dane, what is it, maiai?
Oh, maiai? Yeah. So this one, I think we talked about it a little bit too. So this kind of ties into like tai sabaki and just kind of like where you are. Different arts that I've studied over the years. I don't know if it's an attribute of the art or the teacher, to be honest. But through the years, I've gotten different explanations of it and different uses of it. And really simply, maiai means kind of like the distance between you, the distance between your opponents. So if you think of like the beginning of a judo match or a karate match or anything, you've got the two people facing each other. And like in karate, they typically say the distance that you each have to take one step to hit each other, kind of. So like you're at a distance that this person has to like step in to hit you and you have to step in to hit them, kind of a thing. And they would call that the maiai, like the distance between you when you start. And then in Aikido, we called maiai, I think it was the distance where your fingertips touch. If you're standing facing each other, your fingers would touch. And then I think in sword fighting, your maiai is like one step further than your swords touching. Like you would take your swords touching and then take a step back. So that's the like basic use of it, is just the distancing that you're in. So kind of like your range. Are you in striking range, grappling range, whatever? So that was how I was taught it and thought about it for a very long time. And then I encountered some Okinawans who talk about it as being way more subtle than that. And it's really about maintaining a distance where you can hit your opponent, but they can't hit you. So it's not actually like a distance where you both can hit each other, which is what it's become in this kind of sport mentality of like two karate guys do karate to each other and judo guys do judo to each other. So you have to be ready to go. And it's more like you're putting yourself in a position that you can attack your opponent and they just can't do anything to you. Like getting behind them would be good maiai, because you're in a position where you can do anything and they're in a position where they can't do anything or can do one thing or whatever. So maiai in that sense becomes constantly adjusting your distance and position relative to your opponent, so you have an advantage. But some people don't think of it that way. They think of it as like a place where you can both attack each other, or a place of even whatever. And so that's just kind of what that is and what I'm talking about there. And I think every art has a different expectation of that, you know, like what do you want to do to the opponent? Do you want to go head on to them? Do you want to go at a 45? Like, I think Dave mentioned the tai sabaki aspects of like karate. You tend to think back and forth. If they throw a punch, I step back and block. I step forward and punch. But in like Okinawan karate, really, they step forward to punch. You go off at a 45,
Yeah.
Now they're really committed over here and you come in obliquely, you know? So that's maiai for them. Whereas like Shotokan karate, their maiai is just the way that you can keep going back and forth. So that's what I'm talking about there.
Okay. I've learned, like, you know, with jiu-jitsu, I've seen it with 4 zones of defense, 5. And I usually, with my students, I'd say, you know, if you want to stand in your tachiwaza and be a couple 3 feet apart, that's hunky dory. But that's not going to happen on the street. So I want you to start, and you get pretty good at this eventually. I want one of you to extend your arm out to the other and stop about 2 inches before their face. That's where you start your that's where you start your defense from, because that's what's going to happen on the street. I think last week I actually got hit in the mouth by one of my students. Didn't block fast enough, you know, but you know, it didn't cut the lip or anything like that. They were very apologetic. I said, don't worry about it, that's my fault. But you have to, for me, that's more realistic than saying you step in, you step back, you step in, or step this side. Yeah, we do all these things, but they need to be close enough to realize that they can be that close and still do their ukemi, their blocking or deflection, or step back, or what have you. And that's, and Seki wasn't even that way. You know, he wanted us close to each other so that, yeah, you don't block, there's a good possibility you're going to get hit even with your training. And he didn't, you know, we didn't have, you know, he said, you don't need headgear. You just need to know how to block and move. And it was a really good incentive. Same way, one of the stupid stories on him is if a couple of occasions he got frustrated with the students not getting their heads off the mat when they were doing break falls left and right. So one week he brought in some 1-foot sections of 2x4 and put them behind every student's head. And he said, now I want you to do left and right side falls. And every one of them kept their head off the mat, because that 2x4 is hard. You know, you can't do that today, but you know, I think as sensei, we have to find to make things as realistic as possible safely. And that's the hard part, because we want our students back next week. And so that that distance is, you know, and you're confident in Tai Sabaki and Ashi Sabaki, moving your feet. That's one of the most difficult problems I have with my newer students. I'm sure we all do, is, you know, if you move your feet, you can get your body out of the way. Stop trying to move your body, move your feet. Maybe that would be a good topic. Jonathan. Spare with me.
The other thing, Sensei, you don't have to parry a strike very hard to knock it offline.
No.
Which means that any head movement side,
Yeah,
combined with just a light parry is enough for you to then return fire off that 45-degree angle, preferably off their weak side, not their strong side.
yeah. We tend to attach too much importance to one's head. We think it's much bigger than it really is. And some of us are just big-headed, but all you really have to do, you know, if you split your head in half, this is maybe 3 to 5 inches. And that's all that's necessary. You move your head, you can miss getting hit. you know, you don't have to move the whole head. You just basically move it over half a head, and you're probably going to be okay. And that's one thing, like you said, a light deflection at the right spot, or a block at the right spot, will knock that hit off at an angle so that it will miss you. And if you move your head the other way, you're just improving your chances of not getting hit. And that goes back to Dane's ukemi, the blocking. So that, you know, yeah, yeah, our heads are not that big. They actually, if you look at the amount of space your head takes on your shoulders, it's maybe, I'm going to look at Darren's shoulders right now. His head is maybe 1/5, someplace between 1/5, around, most of our heads are about 1/5 the breadth of our shoulders. 1/5 to 1/4. That's it.
The same thing was learned in also in my young days when I studied Jiu-Jitsu, that you only move a bit because it's fast, and you don't, if you make a block, it comes from boxing. I think that if you make a block, you just do a fast move, and then you have your reaction time is fast, and you don't have to do the movement so fast. You just block it out, and that's 1 second. If you do it longer, then there's longer reaction time. But if you do it fast, just small, then you can grab the hand and make the technique fast.
Right.
It was
Yeah.
also how, and there was also emphasized that when you train, try to hit the person, because if you are long distance away from the person, then isn't a real attack. You have to be inside the leverage of the attacker's hand when you train. That was how we also trained when in my young days Jiu-Jitsu.
Okay. Let's move on. Okay, we hit maiai. Okay. Okay, I think is the next one on the list, what, because I'm working off a list that you don't have yet. Is the next topic, what other martial art do you aspire to learn or wish you did learn? Is that the next topic?
Yep.
Okay. Anybody wish they learned something else?
Oh, I'll jump in there. I started off with karate. Absolutely loved it. But my instructor, after many, many years, ended up going full-time into academic teaching. And I went looking for something to fulfill what I thought I was lacking. I found that sensei in you and Budoshin Jiu-Jitsu. I believe both arts work exceptionally well with each other. And I learned so much more from the Jiu-Jitsu, or at least this is my personal feeling. But I think if you do have a little bit of an eclectic background, it can make a big difference.
Yeah. I know with Seki, for a while there, I also studied Katsugo Jiu-Jitsu, which was a different style, radically different from the way Seki taught. But they just both fit together really nicely. And I come up with some techniques and moves, my students think, you know, where do you get that? It doesn't look arty. It doesn't look smooth, but it works. Or what do you mean stick your finger in his ear? Instead of using a nerve, you know, for a Kirby, now you said, stick your finger in his ear and push to see what happens. You know, they're little, how do you say, there can be subtle differences between martial arts, or even different roux of a martial art, that really can expand your knowledge base. And you know, I do say, go ahead.
The good thing about Jiu-Jitsu is there's different techniques, and you can also use the legs, because when I was young, I didn't like boxing. I was afraid of getting hit in the head. So in jiu-jitsu, have the opportunity to use your legs to keep distance from a boxer, give leg punches or something like that. But when I was young, I was afraid of boxing and getting hit in the head. So I always did that thing that I kept a long distance and used my legs against legs, make low kicks to the legs to avoid getting hit in the head. So that's the good thing about jiu-jitsu. You have the options to use your legs also, and not only your hands.
Okay.
Sensei, I'll jump in real quick. I used to do a lot of boxing, and before I started doing actual martial arts. And to preface what I've appreciated doing something else in addition to what I picked up and doing forever in Japanese jiu-jitsu, I would say this. From a practical standpoint in self-defense, I feel like Japanese jiu-jitsu has answered everything that I was looking for, as Tony had mentioned, whether it was Budoshin, Manamiru, just Japanese jiu-jitsu in general. But doing boxing prior to certainly helped my development in Japanese jiu-jitsu, especially when it's related to striking, footwork, and the fundamentals of both of those things. And I think that getting some of the other parts from other systems that you want to apply for whatever reason, whether it's sport or real life, then you can certainly enhance it. But I'm currently at a convention right now in Canada, and there's 15 countries here. I've walked around thousands of people doing demonstrations and practicing martial arts and instruction of martial arts yesterday and part of today and throughout the rest of today and tomorrow. And so far what I've witnessed is, don't matter what they call it, pretty much everyone here is doing jiu-jitsu or calling it something else.
That's pretty much it. There are, you know, I've seen different Ryu of jiu-jitsu get together, and once you get past the terminology in English and Japanese, brown and black belts have no problems working out with each other. They all have the same common base, and that I think is the real strength of the art. They also end up teaching each other all sorts of different little variations that they picked up from their sensei that sometimes get sensei upset when the student comes back home and says, "Sensei, I learned a different way to do this technique." And that is more of a teacher issue, you know, it doesn't even involve the student. But yeah, it's one of the nice things is that it is because jiu-jitsu is a parent art, or Japanese jiu-jitsu is a parent art, so many other arts fit into it. What I will say about boxers, okay, I used to have a black belt student, his name was Rocky Stone. He did boxing. He was the most difficult person to get into because of his footwork. And if you really want to give yourself or your students a challenge, have them work out with a person who is experienced in boxing, because these people dance around like there's no tomorrow. And you know, the people that are chuckling are ones that have had that experience. Okay, they know. Okay, I would just, you know, I used to initially try to keep up with them. I said, this is exhausting. And so I finally stopped and I waited him to get close enough to me, because eventually they do. And, you know, as long as you learn their sequence, you know, they got a 1-2 punch for radar, then the other hand comes in, because that's, you know, there are patterns that boxers generally do follow. And, you know, once you get their approach down, then they're not as much of a challenge. But their footwork is you know, that's why they run so much. But no, and I don't mean it as a criticism, but you know, all that footwork is a lot of work.
Their stamina is amazing.
Sensei, you're the question I had for Darren was at the beginning, he made the distinction between boxing and martial arts, as if boxing was not a martial art. Darren, don't think it is a martial art?
No, I absolutely think that boxing is a martial art.
Okay,
for sure.
all right.
Yeah.
Okay, I just was confused
Yeah,
by
I
the way you
didn't mean.
phrased it.
Yeah, no, I was just saying what I did in the past. But yeah, I think I may have implied that it wasn't. But yeah, I certainly do think it's a martial art.
Okay.
I think for me, a boxer is the most least desirable person I would want to run into on the street.
Amen. Agreed.
Simply because of their footwork.
But I
They don't give you
experienced,
hands either.
I have experienced even being afraid of getting hit in the head. My coach once put a boxer, champion boxer, against me as a jiu-jitsu guy, and I actually got a knockout with making low kicks only and keeping the distance away from. I always run away when he tried to get close, and then I hit him with a low kick. And I tried to hit him so hard with the low kick that I could keep him away as a distance. So with low kicks, it is possible to keep a boxer away from you. But as you all said, a boxer is very dangerous if he gets close, because then you're probably out. So against a boxer with low kicks, it's possible. And then in a Christmas party, we had blindfolded boxing with a kickboxer. And I was also chosen to represent Jiu-Jitsu against kickboxing blindfolded. And there I also saw that if you can Jiu-Jitsu use elbows, what boxing doesn't allow, then you can come up with advances pretty fast, because you know the Jiu-Jitsu techniques are a bit dirtier than a boxer technique. So if you use your dirty techniques and you keep a boxer away from you, then you have a possibility. But yes, somebody like Mike Tyson, I wouldn't fight him.
Okay. This segues really nicely into the next topic, which is because I think you said dirty jiu-jitsu techniques. There are no dirty jiu-jitsu techniques.
Effective.
You only start fights when they're losing and I'm winning.
All is fair in love and war. The next question is, how can you rationalize calling jiu-jitsu the gentle art, considering it can be so violent? And the same thing can be said of other martial arts. So how do you, this is more of a philosophical question than anything else.
So, it's funny, somebody actually was just talking to me about this the other day. So I can take a stab at it first, since I'm probably warmed up on it. I've thought about this a lot, and in karate too, there's the idea of go and the idea of ju. So like there's a system of karate called go-ju, meaning hard and soft. And then, ju-jitsu is just soft, just soft. But I'm thinking about it, it's a little bit more philosophical, I think, like you said. And I don't think they mean hard and soft, like gentle and easy or kind or polite or any of that. I think it means something more like, in a very literal way, I think there's military arts, which would be hard arts. Like that's your hard arts, where you're using spears and arrows and horseback. That's like the hard art. And I think jujitsu is your soft art, meaning not for war. Like you're not in war. You're not wearing your armor, and you're not using naginata, and you're not on a horse, and you don't have shields and all that stuff. I think that's a literal difference. Is the jujitsu is like in your downtime, in your soft time, like when you're not being a hard warrior at war, you're doing these gentle things that help you against like a villain or whatever, not against a war, an army. But I think philosophically, it's gentle like water is gentle. Like, it's the gentle art, the way a tiny stream carved out the Grand Canyon, or like erodes a mountain, right? Like a mountain is hard. You don't want to chisel away at a mountain, but like the rainfall over time is what tears a mountain down. So I think it's soft in that sense. I think that's what they're going for.
And then if you remember the 90s when Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu came out, they proved that a soft art can beat all styles by only making joint locks and showing your Jiu-Jitsu skills off, because the Gracie family, they never hurt people like hitting them or smashing them down. They showed that soft skills could not be beatable in a cage. That was in the early 90s. And I remember when it came, we also started to train it in Finland. Then it really works. The way you could get close and defend yourself, it really works. But nowadays, you have to be careful, because there's a lot of street fighting styles, and they learn to very nasty techniques to attack and finish people off. So from the perspective of the early 90s, where it was more a practice, and you looked at the styles and what is better than the nastiness. I think that there's more nastiness coming around from the street and street fighting. And if you watch the UFC, it's really trying to smash the other guy off and totally finishing. So my strategy, if somebody would try to attack me, then I will always try to just keep the distance in the beginning, just to see what is coming. Because if you get close and you are fast and you are strong, then it's dangerous.
Okay, I think the issue here, maybe we're getting sidetracked. Jiu-jitsu is defined as the gentle art. However, if you use jiu-jitsu techniques, you have the potential of creating a lot of damage, some of which may be permanent injury. And so how do you rationalize, we're calling this a gentle art, because theoretically, as Seki said, you're using the other person's ki, and ideally you're not putting out any effort on your own, and this person ends up with a dislocated and separated shoulder and maybe a concussion and a few broken ribs from a basic hip throw because they didn't know how to land. Okay, so, and this gets then into the issue of, what's reasonable force. But the term jiu-jitsu, gentle art, is it really a gentle art, or is it just that your poor attacker was stupid enough to attack you and doesn't know how to respond to your technique, and that's why he gets hurt?
You in the middle of that is the answer that I would give, but Dave's been trying to get in there. I want to hear what
Hey,
Right,
Dave.
I'm trying to get in here is there's a word I want to use that I haven't heard, and that is modulate. Jiu-jitsu easily allows us to modulate our response. And you can therefore respond to a harsh attack in a gentle way, put them on the ground without hurting them on purpose, and then scamper away. The same technique ratcheted up could cause injury. Ratchet it up another notch, and a lot of techniques will cause hospitalization or death. Same technique, it's just how much you modulate that technique. And jiu-jitsu's beautiful aspects are the ability to take that same technique and bring it up, bring it down, and let it fit the situation. I didn't find that in karate. I didn't find that in boxing. And I studied both of those for years before starting in jiu-jitsu. And it's something I readily noticed and readily appreciate in jiu-jitsu. So we can choose how gentle or how abrasive or how destructive the technique is by how we deliver it.
Okay, very valid point. Okay. Now I call that control. Yeah, because you can control. To me, philosophically, one of the nice things about jujitsu is because, and this comes with experience, because I know how much damage I can do to a person, and I know by how their body is reacting to what I'm doing, I know how much pain or discomfort I am causing. I to some extent, unless the person is really actively resisting, I can control them. I can control that level of pain. And as I tell my students, there's a difference between pain and injury. And if you can use pain to control to secure compliance of your attacker, you may not have to injure them, which is what Dave is saying. You have control. You can modulate what you are doing. In some cases, you won't have that opportunity. You know, if it's a one-on-one situation, you may have that option. If you end up with a standing come along submission, you may have that option. If you're on the ground and he maybe has 2 or 3 friends, that's not an option. Unless you can use some really effective verbal commands saying, you know, you don't back off, I'm going to break this guy's neck and he's dead. Whether or not you can do that is irrelevant, but you know, but if you can, you know, if you can cause enough pain in this person that they're really screaming that they're in pain, their friends may back off because they may believe you. They may not. But yeah, you do have the right, you know, that to me is one of the real niceties of jujitsu, is that you have the more experience you get, or the more experience you are in executing techniques, the more control you have over what you are doing and what happens to your attacker. Tony.
Yes, working with search and escort officers in the prison, it was an interesting situation when the officers are sitting there grabbing and pulling on arms and they can't get compliance. And again, all you have to do, and you show them, get a little bit of a bend in the elbow, roll the elbow. It makes it so much easier. Economy of motion is one of the keys. That also, I think, goes towards the gentleness in jujitsu, because we don't have to fight strength against strength. We remove ourselves, if you would, from the situation by accepting their strength and redirecting.
Right. Yeah, as Seki would say, you help your attacker.
Yeah.
You don't fight them.
Can I do a version of what Tony just said? Because I got asked that question a lot. Why do you call it the gentle art? It's gentle for the person who's doing the technique. I do not have to be bigger and stronger than my attacker. And the best students, the ones that picked up on the techniques to do it well and do it accurately, were the smallest people, the women that couldn't use brute strength. And they understood, I'm not going to be able to go in there and muscle this guy down on the ground or block this person's forceful punch. I don't, but if you know how to do jujitsu properly, you don't need to. It's gentle for them. Gentle is probably the wrong translation. I think of it as light and simple and easy, but it's gentle for the defender. I don't have to be big and strong. I don't have to be bigger and stronger than my attacker. That's where
Kano had a book, right? Mind over muscle or something, right? I think that's what we're talking about here. It's about like using science rather than brute strength, right? Like leverage and physics, and
Right.
You know, understand what's going on, not just attack it head on. Just divert
Yes.
and flow and all that. Yeah.
I agree, and I agree in all aspects. Also, the thing that Jiu-Jitsu has so many variations. That the good thing about Jiu-Jitsu is that there isn't taking anything out of it. It has all the elements that other people don't have. So you can always use one element against the other attacker. That knowing the other style, what it has in it, you just use the other elements from Jiu-Jitsu that he don't have. That's the way you win in Jiu-Jitsu. And I think why a gentle art, why it's called a gentle art, for me, it's because you have the gentle option of executing a technique if you don't need to do it more decisively. So you have the gentle option of finishing a technique with a joint lock or something like that. You don't have to take it all the way. Probably in karate, then you knock the guy out. You have the options always to you knock the guy out and he's finished. But in Jiu-Jitsu, you have the option to finish the fight in a gentle way if you don't want to do more than necessary.
So,
Okay,
we do that now, and I agree with that. Like, I think that way too, and I always have. But now hearing you say it, I'm starting to think about it, and I feel like that might be a modern invention. Like, when I say modern, I mean like 1900 or 1850 or something like that. But like when we do a knife hand, like at the end of a technique, when you put somebody down in an arm bar and then you make believe you're giving them a little knife chop to the neck, like in reality, in 1600, that technique would be taking them down and pulling your knife out and cutting their throat. That would be the real end of the technique. And now today, we symbolize that by taking them down and then saying this could have been a knife, this could be a sword. So I don't know. I'm wondering about that now. I don't know if they were thinking about, because nowadays there's a police officer somewhere, there's like somebody who's going to come help you. So if you bring somebody down into an arm bar and you put them on the ground on their chest, well, like then what? Like, how long do you sit there with them? You absolutely can't let them go. Like, what's going to happen if you let go of that guy? You're back in your fight and now he's really mad, right? So I don't know. Originally, I feel like it was you take them to the ground and like slice their throat.
I'm going to come back at you, Dane, with one of my black belts decades ago. Chase's purse snatcher. This black belt was like 6'15". I don't know. I think the guy was running from him because he just scared of his size. The purse snatcher pulled a knife on him. The black belt took him down with a shoulder lock pin. He said it took the police at least 5 to 10 minutes to get there. He was afraid he was going to have to lift the guy up because the leg that he had under the attacker had fallen asleep. And he said, my other frustration was with the crowd, because the guy was saying, you're killing me because of the shoulder lock. And the crowd is saying, kill him, kill him.
Wow.
And he said, finally the police came. He said, but that is a legitimate problem. How long can you maintain a hold on someone who has physically tried to attack you? And what are the risks of letting go?
And what are your options? Like, do you just break his arm? Like, can you break his arm in that situation? Once you're controlling him, there's no threat.
I think in the United States, it partially depends on what state you live in, unfortunately. But it's what it comes down to is, can you? I'll just pick on New York and California. Can you justify? Can you, if you had to hold them down and you're still in fear? Key is you're in fear for your life. Can you, using that argument, justify breaking his arm or doing whatever is necessary so that he cannot continue his attack upon you, so that you can escape safely? See, all those things have to be in play. And you're gonna have to justify those after the fact, you know.
That can also include a crowd that
Yes.
is fighting for the guy that you're controlling.
That may
Because
be
you
true
may have to
too.
hurt him in order to protect yourself against the rest of the crowd.
Correct.
Yeah,
Yes,
in a way, he's lucky they were yelling, kill him, not yelling, let him go, you're killing him.
yes.
They try to explain, like, no, I'm not.
Yeah.
It just hurts a little.
Yeah, this was back in, I think, in the 80s. You
Yeah.
know, yeah, it depends on, you know, and a lot of it comes down to you, if you have this person in a quote unquote pin or control hold or what have you, how calmly you can address the rest of the people around you. Because that is, you know, you have to do so much to CYA today, because there's always going to be someone in the crowd who thinks, you know, who's got a big, you know, what am I going to say? They got a big mouth. There's always going to be someone, you have to face it, but you have to maintain a calm, demure stature as you're causing this guy a lot of pain, because it shows them that you're, number one, you're in control, and number two, you have a reserve, and they don't know what it is yet. You know, so
Actually, it's a very good point because
it's intimidation to an extent.
Yeah, in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, they have said that you don't to keep your lock in a long time, you have to lower you don't do it in full force. You only use 25% of the joint lock and add your own mass to the lock, so you don't tire yourself out. So you don't use full force, but own body weight and 25% of the lock to keep it longer. But yes, I think it's a big problem. How long can you hold a joint lock in minutes if you have to wait for help? I think it's a very good point there.
Yeah,
you have to finish the arm off, or can you hold him for 6 to 10 minutes?
yeah, I mean, you know, that's a hypothetical situation, but you know, this black belt was in that situation, and if parts of your body start falling asleep, so to speak, you know, what are your choices?
Sensei, I believe that it really comes down to understanding the threat and understanding the situation. I mean, holding someone in a position to where it compromises your own safety, but still thinking that there's a threat there, is probably not within your best interest. That you know, compromising your own safety, if that's the reason why you had to defend yourself, or if you're using it as a restraint, then you really have to kind of consider all of those factors when determining what you're going to do with it. And I think that if you're in a position to where you have to advance the technique because it does compromise your safety, then you should understand the state laws that are applied for it as well.
Right.
Whatever the result might be.
What you might want to do, and I'm just saying this, I just thought this is a suggestion because I've been to court on this once, and I've had to explain myself. And fortunately, my explanation was more than sufficient. If you know someone who is a criminal attorney, ask them to spend half an hour with you and grill you. You know, come up with a hypothetical situation where you ultimately maybe did injure this person, or you had to keep them in this position. Have them grill you on why explaining what reasonable force is, why you had to do it, what were the consequences, what were your options. Just because once you've been through that experience, it's like anything else. You know that you have a better chance of explaining yourself, because when you're in the courtroom, you've got to be able to do that clearly, and you've got to be able to do it competently. Otherwise, you're going to end up, you know, how do you say, you don't want to give the other side an opportunity to do anything with your testimony. And so it's a worthwhile experience if you can find a criminal attorney who would do, or or a much better than that, even a judge, who'd be willing to spend 20 minutes, half an hour grilling you on what's reasonable force. And but you need to know, like I said, it depends on what state you live in. And that's something we're going to hit up in the future, stand your ground or reasonable force. And those are two different things, depending on what state you live in. Anyway. Okay. We have one more topic if we want to. It's about 9:16 right now. And that would be martial arts techniques. Have you had to withhold a technique that you consider dangerous from certain students, unless they are a certain rank, age, or maturity? Which techniques do you consider to be too dangerous to teach to the general students or the public? We want to get into that today, or we want to leave that for next time? Because it would go very well with the next two topics. One is reasonable use of force, and the other one is hopefully some sort of discussion on the chokehold incident on the New York subway earlier this week that was on TV, as edited as it was, which is an entirely different issue. So do we want to launch into this today, or do we want to save it for the 20th?
Let's save it. Let's launch into it next time and combine them.
Okay. So we'll put that for next week too. Okay. Anyway, if you have, after that, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We have 6 additional topics. If you have any other topics or ideas or things you think might be good for discussions, please let me know. I like to have a running list so we can go on for the next 30 years. No, not really.
And we will be talented jiu-jitsu people if we do it for 30 years.
Yeah, so if you have something that you think is worthy of discussion, or if you have a question that you'd like clarified, anything, just send it to me. I mean, I took Dane's, what he wrote down on the New York subway incident, and I came up with 1, 2, 3, 4. I came up with 7 questions pertaining to it. So if we all have things we wonder about, and this is your opportunity to get that out there and see what other people think. And who knows, it might be a really exciting topic, and we may end up like we've had some topics in the past couple of sessions where we've been on one topic for 1 hour and 45 minutes, which I thought was fantastic. And it was a really, I think the last video we did was a really great discussion. And anyway, so send them to me.